Cleopatra and Her Son. On one of those same early April days, as Octavius was nearing Italy, a royal Egyptian galley was leaving the harbor of Rome. On the board ship, with a retinue of slaves, guards, and attendants, was a beautiful young queen. The Siren of the Nile, people often called her, for she was the enchanting, glamorous young queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. As her ship pulled out into the bay, one might have seen her standing in the stern, with a tiny boy beside her, taking a last look at Italy. For a year and a half, Cleopatra had been living there, making her home in Julius Caesar's lovely villa and gardens overlooking the Tiber River. With Caesar dead and no reason to stay longer, she had now left Rome and was taking her small son back to Egypt, where he had been born. A half sigh escaped her lips as she watched the receding shoreline, and she clasped tighter the small, warm hand in hers. Overhead, the sky was bright and high. Blue water sparkled in the sun, but for Cleopatra, it was no shining day. Julius Caesar was dead, and with him had died all their dreams, all their plans for a great world empire, to be shared by them together and inherited by their son, Julius Caesar, was dead. He had not lived to found an empire. Little Caesar, his son and hers, would never become king of all the earth, though he was now too little to even know or care. Cleopatra smiled down at him. How much he looked like Caesar. Strange that a child of barely 3 could resemble a man of 58. Yet even his walk, as he trudged off with his nurse across the sunny deck, was like his father's. There seemed to be no polygamy in him, none of his family in his makeup. He was all Julius Caesar's son. Seated now among the cushions of a golden couch, she watched him play, reliving in memory the summer he was born. How delighted Julius Caesar had been to have a son, how he had paced about the palace halls in Alexandria, unwilling to leave for Rome until the baby was born, doubting yet daring to hope that it would be a boy. 4 times he had been married before, and his only child had been a daughter. Now, at last, there in Egypt, in the summer of 47, he had had a son, and what a son! Cleopatra smiled to think of Caesar's pride in him, that son who was born both royal and divine. No one of Caesar's royal wives, she thought, though they might call themselves patricians, that could have given Caesar a son of royal blood, for there was no royalty in Rome. Those 4 wives, the 2 divorced, the 1 dead, and 1 still married to him, was common mortals, all of them, while she, Cleopatra, had been born into the world's most royal family, the Greek Ptolemies of Egypt. Her son would rule Egypt as his Greek ancestors had ruled over the native Egyptians for more than 300 years. For it was from Alexander the Great, who had conquered Egypt and founded Alexandria, that the first Ptolemy had inherited the throne. And he would have also hailed the son of hers as a pharaoh, and wear the 10 times more ancient crown of the native pharaohs, whose ruined capital and gigantic pyramid tombs had been standing years before Alexander and his general. The first Ptolemy had come to Egypt. The gentle motion of the ship, guided through the blue water, reminded Cleopatra of the houseboat on which she and Caesar had once journeyed leisurely southward up the Nile to see the remains of that marvelous old civilization. There, falling on their faces before her, the poor native Egyptians or farmers had greeted Cleopatra just as their forefathers had hailed the ancient pharaohs. She remembered the envy on Caesar's face as he saw such homage paid to her as had never been accorded him, the most brilliant, powerful, foremost citizen of Rome. Rome was a republic. Roman citizens hated kings. They had the idea that they ruled themselves and chose their leaders. A most ridiculous idea. How could a mob of ignorant, common people take the place of a king when kings were gods on earth? She, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, had been born a goddess. She was the earthly form of the Holy Mother Isis, and her son, little Caesar, was actually the son of the Almighty Amen, the great god of Egypt. So the high priest had announced to the people at his birth Julius Caesar, they explained, was merely the human form in which the great god had appeared on earth to wed Cleopatra. As a hard-headed Roman, Julius Caesar could see how much it inspired the people with awe and respect to believe that their rulers were divine and immortal. He adjusted himself quite readily to the new position and claimed additional proof of his divinity. My own Roman clan, the Julian, he had told her, have a divine ancestor. We have descended from Aeneas of Troy, who was the son of Venus. Venus, many believed, was but another name for Isis. Later, in Rome, Julius Caesar had built a temple to his ancestor Venus and had placed it in a statue of her for which she, Cleopatra, had posed. In those last months of his life, she had been happy to see Caesar begin to dress and act the part of a divine king and prepared to carry out their dream of the empire, which had now failed so miserably. And why had it failed, that dream of theirs? Cleopatra sat up suddenly, clenching her small fists as if some quick action might yet save the day. Why had Caesar died and their dream died with him? Why? Because for once in his life he had been bold and quick enough, she said to herself. He had not been bold or quick enough, rather. If only he had not waited to take the final steps of declaring himself king until after the campaign in the East, he might have swept the people with him before his enemies had found time to organize. Certainly, if only he had spied out those enemies first and had them poisoned. As any polygamy would have done, he would still be alive. But he had been too generous with his enemies, too ambitious to cover himself with glory in one last victorious campaign. And so now he was dead. Julius Caesar was dead, and she was on her way back to Egypt with her small son, Caesarion, who had now not even been mentioned in his father's will, that Cleopatra understood. Having no empire, Caesar had nothing to leave his son but money, which, as son also of the richest queen on earth, he did not need. Caesar had therefore left most of his fortune to his favorite nephew, Octavius. How fond Caesar had been of that boy, Octavius. Cleopatra remembered seeing him for the first time, soon after she had come to Rome, riding beside his uncle in the African triumph. He was a pale-faced young fellow, about 6 years old, than she was herself. Probably agreeable enough, but he had a nasty complexion and such little mousy teeth. She wondered how he would have made out in claiming his inheritance. It would be a dangerous attempt. To her it looked as if Rome might be in for another civil war. And on this April day, as she sailed for Egypt, it also appeared to Cleopatra that the man most likely to come out on top in this coming struggle was Mark Antony. It would be wise to keep watch of Antony. He might be of use to her and to Egypt.